We're late, eh? No?
Yes, ma'am. That's okay.
You start?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutade Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswata Devi Gauravani Prachadane Nirvashesha Shunyavadi Pasachade Shatadane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Saraswati Gaur Bhaktivedanta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So this chapter is about Nitya Dharma, and Nitya Dharma was ultimately prema, but then to get to prema, we practice it. And we have two types of sadhana. One is Vaidhi, and the other is Raganuga. So Vaidhi Bhakti means following rules and regulations in the performance of bhakti. May look like following rules and regulations of karma yoga. 6 Rajasic, and 6 Sattvic. So in this way, we have a variety of types of worship, but we should understand that we're trying to get pure bhakti out of all this, not this Rajasic and Tamasic and even Sattvic things. So a common theme in the scriptures is you act according to your qualification. So if you're qualified with level, let's say Tamagun, then you're advised to worship Shiva, because Shiva's in charge of Tamagun. And he's in charge of Tamagun people. He's in charge of Ahankara and ignorance. If you're in Sattvagun, then you're advised to worship Vishnu. Vishnu, we know, is the controller of Sattvagun. So the goal is not to keep people fixed on those levels, but to elevate them. So by worshiping Shiva in Tamagun, eventually you rise above Tamagun. By worshiping Brahma in Rajagun, eventually you get to Sattvagun. When you get to Sattvagun, then you worship Vishnu. So in other words, these are not permanent recommendations, temporary recommendations for people according to the qualification, and eventually they get purified and they end up in Sattva, then they worship Vishnu and Krishna, then they become Vaishnavas. So that's the ultimate goal, but it's indirect. So the intelligent person has to read the scriptures with a little bit of discrimination. We can't just blindly read scriptures and take one quotation and then follow that quotation and ignore everything else. Rather, we should look for the final conclusion of the scriptures and take that. So the Bhagavatam itself says the honeybee will go to all the flowers and it will take out the honey, the nectar out of the flower. So an intelligent human being should also do that with the scriptures, take out the nectar, take out the essence, not get distracted by all of these other processes. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur also emphasizes that our purpose is not simply to condemn and criticize everybody, because the Vaishnava is very tolerant and compassionate. So he realizes that these lower forms of worship are meant for people of certain qualification. And if they are attached to that, we don't try to disturb them too much. At the same time, we do have to know what the ultimate goal is and not think that that's the ultimate goal, simply to worship Shiva or Brahma. So we have compassion for people, but we hope that through this process they will become elevated and go beyond Tamagun and Rajagun. So in the worship, I also mentioned previously that some people worship these 5 forms: Shiva, Durga, Ganesh, Surya, and Vishnu. And they say worship Vishnu. So I'm also a Vaishnava because I worship Vishnu. But the worship that these people do is quite different. That type of worship of Vishnu is temporary worship. When we get to the stage of liberation, we give up that worship. It does not continue when we get the goal of our worship. So therefore, they're not really Vaishnavas. If we perform bhakti in a pure way in sadhana, we can progress to bhava and prema. And when we get to prema, we do not give up the worship. We worship Krishna more. So the worship is eternal. We do it in sadhana, we do it in prema. The worship in when we mix the bhakti with other processes, we may worship Vishnu or Krishna, but then when we get liberation, we give it up. So the goal is quite different. So here, the whole goal is centered on pleasing the Supreme Lord. So we never give up the worship. That's the eternal worship. So our philosophy behind that is that the Supreme Lord himself is not a temporary phenomena made out of matter. Even though he's in the Murti form, he's actually eternal, and his form is eternal. So now we talk about the deity form. The deity forms are often criticized. And in the Jaiva Dharma, there's a whole section where the Muslims come and they say, well, we have to talk to you about these forms you're worshiping. We don't like these forms. Why? If this, you're talking about the Supreme Lord and everything, but how you can make a form out of metal or wood, that seems rather foolish. Huh? So then there's a whole discussion on what the actual deity is. So these forms that we worship, they look like they're material, but actually they're not. And the Lord himself is got a form, but it's not a material form. So he's Satchidananda, eternity, knowledge, and bliss. So his deity form also is the same, and therefore we should not condemn that worship. So Jiva Goswami, or Bhaktivinoda Thakur, gives a little bit of an explanation that the sages realize the deity in the mind with his form, and then they externalize that form into the deity form. So the actual form is a spiritual realization, and then they convey that into a form of the deity. So therefore, it's not a material form in that sense, because it comes from realization, not from some speculation in the material mind. And then when we see that form, then we can realize the spiritual nature of that form, because it started out from a spiritual realization. So it is formed because of spiritual realization, and then when we look at it, we can get the spiritual realization. So in that sense, it's not material. Okay, so this is a discussion. This chapter 6 is on Varnas, or the caste system, the different categories of people according to their gunas. So this is all part of karma yoga, and the Varnas are caused by the law of karma. So we have a high Varna or a low Varna, Sudra Varna or Brahmana Varna. So all this is caused by karma, which is material. And when we are born into a certain Varna, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Sudra, then our activities are prescribed, and we should do those activities and not do other activities. So there's a restriction on our activity because of our Varna, which is from our karma. And if we're not in the Varnas, that's called Antyaja, which means outside the caste system completely. The people that don't belong to any caste at all, they call Antyaja, or outcasts. So that's the system within karma yoga and varnashram. Due to karma, we divide people up according to their gunas, and we get varnas, and then they have certain duties to perform in life. So if we do practice pure bhakti, we are called a Vaishnava. This is independent of your varnas, which should come up from karma. So in other words, anybody of any varna or of no varna, it's possible for him to practice bhakti and be a Vaishnava. So it's quite different from the designation of a varna because of karma. If we have the faith, we can practice as a Vaishnava, and it doesn't matter who you are. So the Muslim or the Yavana, he has bad karma to get a faulty birth like that, and therefore he cannot do anything in the Varnashram system, not even the Sudra work. However, if he has faith in bhakti, he can do the activities of bhakti. It's got nothing to do with what level of you are according to your karma at all. So therefore, we have the famous quotation in the Bhagavad Gita, Mamhi Partavya Vasarja, Episu Papa Yonaya Hastriyo Vaisasta Sudras Tepiyate Param Gatim. Even those born in sinful situations, such as women, Vaishyas, and Sudras, and even the outcasts, if they surrender to me, attain me, the supreme goal. So everybody is allowed to attain Krishna through the process of bhakti. And this, of course, is emphasized very much by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In his life, we see that he respected Haridas Thakur, who was a Muslim by birth, as the Acharya for the holy name. And generally, the people who were in the caste system would never go near a Muslim or touch one or take his food or talk to him or whatever. They would avoid completely as much as they could. But Lord Chaitanya would daily visit Haridas Thakur. And when he passed out of his body, then he touched him. Oh, and you're not supposed to touch these people at all because then you get contaminated. And it's a dead one, also dead body also of a Muslim. But he touched his body, he carried his body, he buried his body, held a ceremony for him. And then he begged food to have a feast afterwards from Jagannath Prasadam. So he broke the rules, the normal rules within the Varnashram system to give respect to the Vaishnava. This is not only case, there's other cases as well, but this is a famous case. So this illustrates the fact that the Vaishnava is beyond the Varnas. How is it the Vaishnava is beyond all karmas is because we get a Varna by our karma. Bhakti removes karma. So therefore it removes all sorts of Varna or no Varna, whatever it is. It doesn't matter, it's all gone. All that is destroyed by the process of Bhakti. So that, of course, is stated many places in Bhagavatam and other Puranas. Here is one here. The outcast who utters the name of the Lord once is directly liberated, which liberation means no more karma. And of course, the example is Ajamil, who wasn't an outcast, but he was a fallen Brahmana who did many sinful activities. He uttered the name Narayana to indicate his son, and all of his karmas were destroyed. And he wasn't even a devotee. So just by chanting the name of the Lord once, the outcast can be liberated. He's beyond his karmas at that point. So the qualification in the Varnashram system is you're qualified by your gunas for a certain Varna, and then you do certain activities. Qualification for Bhakti has not got to do with Raja or Sattva, gunas at all. It's based on Shraddha on the Supreme Lord, faith in the process of Bhakti, faith in the Bhakti scriptures. So if we have that faith, then we're qualified to begin the process of Bhakti, regardless of our karma. And we begin the process, we destroy all of our karma. Therefore, Bhakti is quite different from the Varnashram system. Bhaktivinoda Thakur also gives a more flexible vision of the Varna system. He explains that the Varna is determined by the qualities. We observe the qualities of a person, then we assign him a Varna. And he says that just saying because he's born in a Brahmin family, therefore he's a Brahmin, that's a modern custom. So in ancient times, they would look at the qualities and then they would assign your Varna according to your qualities, not just your birth. Due to the qualities, then we have a tendency to do certain type of activities. And we can do those activities more expertly than other activities. We have certain qualities. So therefore, it's the qualities which should be or karmas. So that's a natural result. However, the qualities that we manifest often could arise because of our birth. Just hereditarily speaking, 2 black dogs give birth to black offspring puppies or whatever like that. So we hope that we have a man and a woman from Brahman family. Their children would be kind of Brahminical and sattvic in nature, the qualities by inheritance reason, and then by environment and upbringing. So it's natural also that birth can play a factor, but it's not absolute. So parents is one that may influence the nature. Another is association. So even if you do have some good qualities because of hereditary factors of parents, if you're brought up in an environment which is not proper, those qualities won't manifest properly. So you may have a sattvic nature, but if you're put into a tamasic society, you may not manifest those sattvic qualities. You may start getting tamasic qualities instead. Or just like if we eat sattvic food, we become sattvic. If we eat tamasic food, then we tend to be tamasic. So you could be born in a Brahmin family, but if you eat meat, then you may not show Brahminical qualities at all because of bad association of your food and your people that you associate with. So these are reasonable things. Birth is a consideration. Environment and association is a consideration. Education is a consideration also. And then, of course, we should look at the qualities ultimately when you are mature. After all this, and then based on that, we can say the Varna. So ultimately, we depend on the qualities, whatever factors are there. Yeah. Yeah. So we have the birth, hereditary factors. We have whatever it is. Of course, sometimes we have two black dogs and they produce a white dog. So a Brahmin man and a woman may produce a Sudra. We don't know. Sometimes we get mutation, or sometimes we get some recessive genes coming up, and we get different qualities. So it's unpredictable sometimes. But as a general thing, we could say that okay, they're going to have the birth as a consideration, and that will determine the nature to some degree. But then we have the environmental factors and association, education, etc. And then finally, out of that, when we look at all the qualities that are there, fixed when the person is mature, adult, then we say that would be the Varna. So just to determine it on the birth, that is artificial. It's an easy way of doing it, but it doesn't guarantee the person is going to have those qualities because they may not have the proper environment, whatever, and there may be some irregularities in the hereditary pattern also. So they might have Brahminical qualities by nature anyway. So there's many factors involved. Okay, now a little bit on faith, which means a conviction or an acceptance of the existence of the Supreme Lord with sincere heart, and willingness to do actions for the Lord, of service for the Lord, to try to please him. We can have a false faith also, artificial faith. This faith actually would come from the Atma or the Jiva. It's not a mental thing. This, you can get by environment or whatever like that. It's something that affects the Atma, and the Atma begins to change and become favorable to the Lord. So the first inclination is faith, and that manifests through the mind, of course, and so that we have a certain mentality. But actually, it's a change within the Jiva himself to develop that conviction in the Supreme Lord, which may take many births to do. So we can have a false faith or erroneous faith. We can have an impure heart, and we can perform actions for the Lord which superficially look like bhakti, but actually we don't have the proper faith because we have selfish motives, etc., and desire for position, pride, etc. So that's not real faith. It's just false faith, put on for show, more or less. A person who with firm faith in the Lord engages in worship by hearing and chanting, though he acts contrary to the manuals of karma because of his bad nature, should be considered to be a devotee because he's following the path of bhakti, engaged in wonderful actions, which means even if he commits an act which is by karma is bad, sinful act or whatever, even if he does do that, still, if he continues to follow bhakti with firm faith, then he's considered to be better than the people following karma yoga. So why? Because to follow that path of pure bhakti is the best process. And if he has a fault on the lower level,
then that's not considered to be a very great fault. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, forget about all dharmas, just surrender unto me. So that sounds a little bit revolutionary. Then we can get all sinful activities and just do bhakti. But it doesn't really mean that. If we do bhakti, and we dedicate ourselves to that as our main item, automatically all the good points in dharma get fulfilled. So you will develop all the good qualities that people try to cultivate in dharma. And by nature, you follow all the rules that you're supposed to follow. In other words, we don't commit violence, don't commit sinful activities. So that's the nature of bhakti itself to do that. So these develop with bhakti. So bhakti is the process, and dharma follows from it. So there's no necessity of doing extra beyond that. So, of course, ultimately, the Lord himself is the root of all the dharmas, whether it's karma yoga, gyan yoga, stanga yoga, or bhakti yoga. So he's the one that sets up the rules anyway. So if we follow the Lord, then we're going to the root of all dharma, and automatically everything that's favorable naturally develops. So all the rules of dharma are automatically included in bhakti. Through the process of bhakti, then we invoke the Lord in the heart. The Lord manifests himself within the jiva. And with that, then all of the bondage of Maya is destroyed. So then there's no dependency on other processes at all, because all the bondage of karma is automatically destroyed by the process of bhakti, and all good qualities manifest. So in that sense, by performing bhakti, the purpose of dharma is fulfilled. So how does that faith arise? Bhaktivinoda actually, he wrote a work called Amnaya Sutras. And so there he has this statement: faith is a special function of the heart, inclined to bhakti, devoid of other methods. So the faith itself is distinguished from bhakti because it's an inclination to perform bhakti, based upon the fact that we accept the Lord and the jiva as a servant. And it's a function of the heart, which also means the jiva, not of the material mind or intelligence. When in devotee association, one hears topics of the Lord, and the heart understands that the jiva cannot attain anything eternal from karma, gyan, or yoga, and there's no other goal for the jiva except taking shelter of the Lord's feet with pure love, one should understand that faith in Vedas and Guru's words has manifested. So that indicates faith, because we give up other processes, and we feel that we just take shelter of the Lord with pure love, and that solves all the problems. So that's the faith. So within that faith itself, we have surrender, or Sharanapati. Sharanapati is sometimes taken as a separate anga of bhakti, like nectar of devotion. But here, there's an element of that surrender in faith itself. So a little bit of a surrender is necessary to begin the process of bhakti. And there's this famous verse here about what does surrender mean. We have these 6 elements of surrender: acceptance of things favorable for devotional service, rejection of unfavorable things, conviction that the Krishna will give protection, acceptance of the Lord as one's guardian and master, full self-surrender, or atmanivedana, whatever, and humility, dainya or karpanya. So these are the 6 elements of surrender. And so these are included within faith itself. We have to have some sort of idea of that. In other words, if we accept the Supreme Lord in our position to serve him, then we have a willingness to do everything which will increase that and support that. And we will also avoid everything which is going to detract from that. So that's a natural tendency we should have. Huh? And along with that faith, then we take the Lord as our protector, and as our guardian, etc. And we try to offer everything to the Lord. And we're humble. We're the servant of the servant of the servant. These are automatically included within faith itself. So of all those 6 elements there, the different elements there, we have ultimately we call that surrender, but they have these different aspects to it, all of which are included within faith itself to some degree. Being situated with a heart which makes this vow full of faith, conviction, surrender, and humility is faith. So the person who has developed this faith is qualified for bhakti. So bhakti indicates engaging the senses. So before we do that, we have to have that conviction that it's going to, that we're the Supreme Lord and our goal is prema. And by doing these activities of bhakti, we'll get the prema. So the faith is necessary before we do the activities. So he says this faith is a shadow of the nature of the eternally liberated pure devotees. In other words, the devotees who are eternally liberated, they naturally manifest a full faith. So we get a little reflection of that when the jiva first starts bhakti, but it's necessary to start the whole process. And it doesn't disappear, it keeps increasing as bhakti goes on. So we can say that this faith is also the eternal nature of the jiva, and other natures are temporary or naimittic. So how does that faith arise? Ultimately, by sukriti. But that sukriti is not normal material pious activities. The sukriti ultimately means bhakti itself, and particularly association and mercy of devotees. So that is the sukriti, which will, after a lot of that, will manifest as faith. So sukritis for getting material benefits, etc. That's not the right sukriti. That doesn't produce it. These are naimittic things which produce temporary results. So devotee association will produce the faith, and then with that faith, then we can get the bhakti. However, if we don't have faith, how do we get the sukriti? How do we associate with devotees? Because we don't strive for devotees, so we don't have any faith. We don't understand what devotees are. So that sukriti or association is accidental, or we can say unintentional on the part of the person because he has no faith. So it is a little bit haphazard. He's not looking for devotees. Devotees may be looking for him instead. But he doesn't have any faith, so he doesn't really accept it. So it's accidental in that sense. It's unintentional on his part, such as taking prasadam, just eating because he's hungry, and you eat it as prasadam, and you don't know it's prasadam, but you get the effect. And if you eat enough prasadam over many lifetimes, then you get faith. So many things like that. It's seeing the form of Jagannath and Rath Yatra, or it's just hearing the name of the Lord in kirtan. Like, there's a little effect on the jiva. We can't see it externally, but it's a little effect. And if those little effects build up a lot, then that will produce the faith. Once the faith is there, then the person gets inquisitive, and he has some interest in the subject, and then he'll approach devotees. And then the devotee will start him to perform bhakti. So usually it takes many births because it is accidental. It's not that he's looking for these sukritis. So this happens to him by accident, birth after birth after birth after birth. And it affects the jiva eventually, more and more and more. And then finally, that pure faith develops. So once we have the faith, then we begin the process of bhakti, and the attraction to the Lord develops and develops and develops. And this becomes the Nitya Dharma, or the eternal nature of the jiva. If the bhakti produces either material results or liberation, then that is not the same type of bhakti. This is a naimittic karma, and it's an anga of naimittic karma, that bhakti. So bhakti can be performed before liberation, during the liberation, after liberation. Then it's eternal. So that's the type of bhakti that we want. Association of devotees and activities of bhakti these are eternal sukritis, or eternal acts, which will give us benefit and help us advance in bhakti. So they will give us faith, and based on that, we can begin devotional service. Material sukritis will give material results, but they won't produce that faith. So anyone who has the faith, that development of faith is not dependent on karma, it's dependent on devotee association. So the devotee may be merciful to a person in the Varnashram system or outside the Varnashram system. So therefore, the Haridas Thakur or a Muslim or a Mlechya can develop that faith by mercy of devotees. And it's not dependent on your karmas at all. Even though these activities of bhakti are not performed with pure faith or happen accidentally, they are sukriti which nourish bhakti. When that sukriti becomes strong, faith and pure bhakti and association with the devotees can manifest after many births. So it's gradual accruement of sukritis. So all of the activities, of course, hearing and chanting, have some shakti in them. And even if we're not intending to do them, they have some effect, and they can all produce faith. So it could be any type of bhakti. It can be hearing the name, it can be taking prasadam, it can be seeing the deity, taking charanamrita, or whatever, smelling a flower offered to the deity, whatever. Any act of bhakti, this can help us. In the, I think it is the Ekadasi Mahatmya, there's all the different types of Ekadasis you can do. So some of these are accidental Ekadasis. Somebody fasted because they didn't have any food on Ekadasi. For some reason they couldn't eat. And then they got the benefit of that and got a kingdom back or whatever like that. So it's accidental bhakti like that. So they may get a material result from that, but they also get increase in their faith through that accidental act of bhakti. So should the devotee, because he is above the level of karma yoga and varnashram, should he reject the four varnas and all the activities in it? So the answer is no. He should do those actions which are favorable for bhakti, those actions in the varnashram system. Then, at a certain point, if he becomes completely indifferent to those four varnas and ashrams, that means he becomes like a sannyasi or renunciate. Then he's qualified to renounce everything. So then he's beyond all the varnas. But before that, when he's on a lower stage, then to the degree that these things are favorable, he will perform these things, different duties. If some of the parts of the duties in the varnashram are unfavorable, that is, are contrary to the nature of bhakti, he may avoid them or alter them in such a way to make them favorable. So instead of worshiping devatas, they can worship them as servants of, or Vaishnavas, servants of the Lord, for instance. So they can worship the different devatas as devotees, instead of worshiping them as independent entities that give their own results. And that way they can do the activity, but without any offense. Okay, so we do the bhakti, and we can do all these karmas as long as we aren't attached to getting material goals from them. We have no attachment to them for material goals. So we just do them out of duty. So therefore, they don't have the bad effects of karma in them. So therefore, Vedic Dharma, if it follows pure bhakti, is not unfavorable for bhakti. So we just have to be detached from the material results. Okay. So generally, the Vaishnavas who are householders or grihastas, then they should follow the rules of the Varnashram. This, of course, is talking about people in India, born into the society there. The society in general, because it's rather materialistic, is not so favorable. But he cannot reject it also because he's living in society. And only when he's completely detached and has given up his family, then he can reject it. But before that, he can't. So then he's obligated to follow those rules of the Varnashram system. The question also arises about the Vaishnava. The Vaishnava may not even be in the Varnashram system, what to speak of being a Brahmana. Would he be qualified to chant the Vedas? Because generally only Brahmanas, or at least Vaishyas, Kshatriyas, and Brahmanas can chant, and Sudras can't, and outcasts can't. So, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's explanation is that regardless of the Varna, if you're practicing pure bhakti and you're pure Vaishnava, then we are spiritual Brahmana. So the Vedas have portions for ordinary karmas and portions which are more spiritual. So the material Brahmins are qualified to recite the karma aspects. And the spiritual Brahmana, that is the Vaishnava, he can recite the spiritual aspects, the spiritual portions of the Vedas. Okay, I don't know. Should stop there. Any question?
Maharaj, so when a devotee like myself, when I think I'm giving prasadam, I'm giving sukruti to that person.
Yeah.
Is that a right thing to think? Is it?
Oh yeah. If we can't preach to them directly, especially they don't know, they don't have real faith, then we just give them prasadam, and we don't even have to tell them it's prasadam. Then we can just say, "This is very delicious food. Please take it. We have some extra," or something like that.
Okay. So the first time it is accidental. So the devotee gives sukruti to someone.
Yeah.
So after that, does the Lord make arrangement for the person, for the jiva to get sukruti in the?
Well, mostly it's dependent on the devotees. So the devotees have to make plans to give them more sukruti.
But it will be accidental, that they don't get to meet the same jiva again and again.
Well, they may not. Of course, you may, if your neighbor is there, then you can keep giving more and more prasadam. So it's not so accidental on our part. On his part, he doesn't know what's happening. But on our part, we can make a plan like that. So they get a lot of sukruti that way. Of course, other things like festivals, then you just your prasadam. So that may be very accidental. We don't know who's getting it, whatever. And so many people are getting it. So they may only get it once in their lifetime. But that's why the devotees are encouraged to do all of these activities to spread that sukruti to more and more people, and that way there's possibility that everyone gets influenced, and then after a few lifetimes they all become devotees.
Maharaj, in that aspect of giving sukruti, in a way we are more attached to those who are close to us, either the husband or wife, or if somebody is not in Krishna consciousness, and, or the parents or something like that.
Yeah.
So, but what we see here is that it takes so many births to accumulate the sukruti.
Yeah. But if they're closer, then we can give it much quicker. A lot of sukruti quicker, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or like if it's a neighbor, then you can keep giving prasadam. So
them.
that's not just once in a lifetime. You can give them every week or whatever like that. So they get quicker advancement that way.
Okay. So in addition to giving prasadam or something like that, so we have to keep doing more things that will give them sukruti again and again and again, so make them favorable or start building that faith.
Well, I think we can't artificially do it. We don't know how it's going to develop in each individual. So, but the other thing is the association itself is a Sukriti.
Yeah.
Or just like because the parents aren't Vaishnavas, but you're a Vaishnava, just by being the parents, they get a Sukriti for that also.
Okay.
And of course, if you associate with them and you're not preaching to them, still that's a Sukriti for them as well.
So in that aspect, where does the free will of the jiva comes into play, Maharaj? Like,
Well,
because
the devotee has the free will to choose who he wants to give the prasadam to. So that is why the devotees are glorified, because they're the ones that produce the faith by their selfless activities. And then after the faith is got, then they do the preaching. So it's a necessary link in delivering people in this material world. If we don't have the devotees there, nothing's going to happen.
I can kind of understand where that question is coming from, because like, let's say someone just comes into a temple, like they just walk off the street, they just happen to come across a temple, and someone just happens to give them some prasadam, and then they walk out and they never have any connection ever again. Because they did something there, they did some devotional service by at least eating prasadam. Does the Lord then do more to bring them back in future?
Probably, yeah. They're like in the, of course, we can't really tell, but the Lord is trying to encourage everybody, and as Paramatma, he's trying to push everybody in that direction. But because we're so dense, covered over, generally we don't listen to Paramatma and don't take those advices. In the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, Gopakumar is going up, and then he gets to meet Vishnu, and then Vishnu says, "Oh, I've been tracing you for lifetimes, and I was always praying that you would become a devotee, and I was following him, and he never became a devotee in that life, and that never became a devotee. And then finally I had to come as a guru, and I gave you a mantra, and then you started the devotional process." So, in that sense, the Lord is looking after everybody, but he's not going to force the issue also. But in this case, he did actually come as a guru and gave him a mantra, so he intervened directly in that case. So the Lord may do that also.
Because of Sukriti, like somebody is like a pure devotee of Ganesha or Shiva or something like that.
Yeah.
That is because of the Sukriti they have, or that is not called Sukriti?
Pure devotee of Shiva?
Shiva.
Well, they could be, we won't call them pure devotees, but devotees of Shiva or whatever like this. Yeah. But that's because of material Sukritis. Yeah? Not when we talk about faith in Vishnu or Krishna, then that is the spiritual, eternal Sukritis. This has to do with Bhakti itself. So they get a faith in the Devatas due to their punyas and whatever in past lifetimes, which is the material punyas instead.
At the beginning, you were talking about deities. Even if there's a material form, seemingly material form, it's still spiritual. Yeah. So how do we then explain when deities, let's say, they decay over time, like they need to be repainted, or let's say if there's, like in New Zealand, there was an earthquake and deities were damaged. They had to get new deities. So how do we explain that they're spiritual if they seem to get damaged?
Well, we can say that the deity leaves at that point. Yeah. So because they're not there, then this can happen, damage or whatever like that. So that's why generally, if we do have damaged deities, then they make a new deity and they reinstall the deity because they understand the deity is no longer there. The Lord himself is not there any longer, for some reason or other. He's left the form.
So that's if the deities are damaged, let's say, beyond repair. Yeah. How about just if they're decaying over time?
Well, it's just like Jagannath every year. No, every year they do the Snanyantri. Yeah. So every year they have to paint them again after the Snanyatra. So that we can say is just it's like Krishna and others in the spiritual world. Every day, Mother Yasoda decorates Krishna and puts cosmetics on him and paints him up and makes him look attractive or whatever like that. We can take it like that. It's a cosmetic decoration. Okay.
What about that mentality of thinking? This is you discussed about Brahmana and Varna. And so what about all the thinking? Oh, this is a Brahmana Vaishnava, this is Sutta Vaishnava, or this is higher Vaishnava, this is lower Vaishnava.
Oh, that's considered aparad. Yeah, that's considered aparad because we're making the Vaishnava into a material being. Yeah, so the Vaishnava is beyond that. So that's why Lord Chaitanya ignored those rules, and he like with Subudhi Rai, he ate in his house because he was a sannyasi and a Brahmin, he shouldn't have done that, but he did because he was a Vaishnava, even though he was an outcast because he had associated with Muslims. But he ate in his house, which is unheard of at that time to do, but he did that because he's Vaishnava. So if we think in terms of caste and whatever, not the Vaishnava, then that's considered aparad.
So shall we consider all the Vaishnavas as exalted Vaishnavas?
Yeah, if they accept pure bhakti, but they may be at different levels also. They may be kanishtas or madhyamas or uttamas. So then accordingly we give greater and greater respect to them also.
All right, so there's a question online. So as we perform bhakti, how do we strengthen the material body, which is probably required to do bhakti as it is in the current state? How do we treat the material body? Should we?
Oh, well, in Nectar Devotion there, in the first 10 angas of bhakti there, Rupa Goswami says that, of course, we dedicate to doing everything for Krishna, but at the same time, we don't neglect the body or anything like that. So whatever is favorable for bhakti, we should accept that and do it. So if our body is sick or whatever, it becomes unfavorable, then we have to cure it in order to make it more favorable for bhakti. So we accept those things which are favorable for doing our bhakti. So we can't neglect and overly renounce and do things like that.
So would that mean that do we say like, okay, I don't want to take this service because it is affecting my health?
That may be there because we do have a limitation. Yeah, in other words, a limitation on how many activities we do, the time we have, energy we can expend, etc. So there's ultimately a limit on how much we can do. So at a certain point, we have to refuse. So we have to be intelligent to see just how much we can do, and then what we cannot do, and then we have to make a decision there, which will vary with different persons according to their abilities and according to their material situation.
But still, would it depend on whether are we rejecting it from a materialistic point of view?
Well, we can. If I do all this, then I get too much pressure, and then I get worries, and then I get sick. So that's a material in one sense. But then again, as I said, we do have to take care of our body and whatever. So there's only there's a limit on how much we can do, and beyond that, it's not going to be active. Okay. Hare Krishna.
Bhanu Swami Maharaj ki jai.